Cool. Thanks, Stephanie. But yeah, as mentioned, so I'm Robby Wright with the Puyallup River Watershed Council and the City of Sumner. And really, I'm kind of glad we're doing this because small grant program is one of the highlights of the Watershed Council's work every year. And Barbara Ann actually gets to work with this all across kind of the county. So I'll actually turn it over to her to kick us off. Um, Once I can click on my slide, there we go.
Okay. Back history of the program. And so I'll tell you how it originally got started. It has an interesting sort of an origin story. Probably, I think it was 20 years ago, might have been more now. We were working with the Peninsula Light Company out on the Gig Harbor Peninsula. They actually they're a power cooperative. They provide service to Gig Harbor and the Key Peninsula. And they were at a time when they were trying to expand their kind of sustainable offerings. So they offered a voluntary subscription to their members that said if you wanted to pay for an extra $5 a month or something like that, that it would go towards renewable energy. And then the other piece of that is that 25% of those funds would be allocated for local environmental grant programs. So since they were working with us and we were actually meeting in their building, the Key Peninsula Gig Harbor Islands Watershed Council, they said, let's have the Watershed Council figure out how to distribute these funds. Well, the first thing that happened was Pierce County Surface Water Management looked at it and said, we would be willing to match whatever the Peninsula Light puts in for those funds so that we can do our part too. So that was, like I said, over 20 years ago. It kicked off in the Key Peninsula Gig Harbor Islands area, and we have been running it ever since. And I am right there with Robby when I say it's one of my favorite things to do. It is amazing what people are able to do with these small amounts of money. Now, one of the things that I've been thinking about as we prepare for this is talking about financial assistance and how we help our community do what we need them to do. And this is one model for it, but we are continuing to have conversations about how we help private landowners, small groups, property owners, just kind of looking at those sorts of situations and figuring out how to provide financial assistance, because sometimes that's the only thing that is preventing some really good work from happening. So we are looking at this idea of financial assistance in a much bigger context as we move forward. And I would suggest that as we walk through this program, if those of you who are here could think about this and provide us with some ideas, that would be really helpful too. So we'll go to the next one. The program has expanded. So for years, it was just in the KGI watershed. And then the city of Lakewood said they were willing to match. So we started offering it in the Chambers Clover watershed. And then we were able to get a match in the Puyallup watershed, and we offered it there. And then finally, in the last 3 years, we decided that we weren't going to require them to come up with a match, but we do still have funds that we're offering in the Nisqually area. We don't have a funding partner there, but we decided we should be fair and they should get funding too. Next. So these are the watersheds that we work off of. You can kind of see our big four are the Puyallup, which is WRIA 10, Chambers Clover, which is WRIA 12, Nisqually, WRIA 11, and then the KGI, the Key Peninsula Gig Harbor Islands, is a small part of the Kitsap watershed, WRIA 15. Next. So let's start talking about the Nisqually. So you can kind of see the geography of the area that we're talking about when we're talking about the Nisqually watershed and the area that the funding would serve. Interesting area. It's got 2 counties, a national park, a beautiful wildlife refuge. It's probably the most rural of our watersheds, but it's also gotten the most attention over the years. There's been state-led efforts to try to restore the watershed, improve the water quality, all that kind of thing. So next. When it comes down to the small grants, these are some of the projects that we have funded or we just paid to fund just recently. So we received applications this year in April, and we have a ranking committee that looks at them and a set of criteria that we use to figure out how to award these funds. One of the things about the criteria process that's important is that we try to customize it for each watershed so it reflects the priorities of the funders. So for example, I mentioned that the out in the KGI area, Peninsula Light is one of the funders. So we have a criteria for that particular watershed where it said, does this project improve energy conservation or water conservation, because they're interested in that too. And so projects that have that are able to get points. So the idea is that if you are a funder, we need to be responsive to the funders and make sure that we are getting money to projects that they are hoping to see. So now in this case, you can see the list of the different funders and some of the projects they did. This was a very frustrating year for Nisqually because we still only have about $12,000 to give out in this watershed. And this particular year, we got requests for about twice as many projects, and they were really good quality projects. So my marching orders moving forward, especially with Nisqually, is to see if I can find a funding partner at a minimum, or try to find some more ways to get some money into this particular watershed. Next. This is the KGI watershed. This is where we got started. You can see the geography of it with the Gig Harbor Peninsula, Key Peninsula, and Anderson, McNeil, and Fox Island. There are several other islands too. Go ahead. And you can see our list of organizations that were funded. Now, usually we have a mix of types of projects, but for the most part, we tend to see two sort of areas of focus. You can see the first one is a beach cleanup project. Kind of an on the ground, it's an on the ground restoration project. We tend to see a lot of those kinds of things. Another one that we tend to see is something like, if you look further down, the Nisqually Beach Nature Center has the pigeon breeding survey. And so we do get quite a few requests for funds to support research and data collection. And then the other one is, that's always a big deal, of course, is education. You can see we've got 2 elementary schools on there, and the Curious by Nature School. And so those are kind of 3 themes that are pretty common in all of our watershed councils and all of our funding, is those are types of projects that the funds tend to focus on. Next. This is Chambers Clover. This is our most urban watershed. We go from the Point Defiance. We have a big hunk of the city of Tacoma, but we also have the JBLM and several cities and towns and a lot of unincorporated area too. So next. And this is the list of organizations and projects that we have for that. So you can see Clover Park, it's an educational program. They want to do salmon in the classroom. One of the partners that we've had that has kind of come on strong is the Tacoma Tree Foundation. They kind of started in the Tacoma area with the intent of trying to increase the canopy cover in the city. And they have just gone great guns. They have an amazing social media program, amazing education programs, and tree shares. So they have been, expanding rapidly and doing some really good work. Then we'll have some stuff like the town of Steilacoom. There's a group of people who are very slowly but surely doing a restoration of this little stream/ditch system that runs through the city and adding habitat to it. And then we have some fun, some interest. We always end up with quite a few interesting partnerships that come out of it. For example, there's a group that in the Chambers Clover, the Way Out Kids program, and it's building youth through music, but they originally started with that, but they wanted to add an environmental element, and it is an educational program that is really focused on very urban areas and communicating in ways that work better in that environment. So for us, it's a huge win because a lot of times it can be hard for us to kind of crack the shell of neighborhoods that are regular education programs don't necessarily have a great track record for connecting with. So, John Keith is on here. He and Nancy Keith both work on a project down in the South Sound Wildlife Area, which is in Lakewood, and there is a Western pond turtle rehabilitation site there, and they work with a few other volunteers to try to restore some of the native vegetation on the site. So it's a bigger project that is being done by Department of Fish and Wildlife, but it's a way for this grant funding program is a way for volunteers who are working on things to sort of contribute to those things too. So next. And then we have the Puyallup, which I think, Robby, do you want to talk about the actual watershed and the projects?
Sure. Yeah, I'll take these two slides. The Puyallup, I think it kind of crosses the line between the Chambers and the Nisqually, where the upper watershed is very rural and undeveloped, and the bottom of the watershed is Tacoma and the port and Fife. So you've really got the kind of two ends of things in the Puyallup River watershed. And it crosses county lines. So it's Pierce and a little bit in King County for the white side. Similar to other watersheds, we do fund a lot of education type programs. And some of these are things that we see come back over several years, and they do little by little and grow and grow. The Foss Waterway Seaport is one example where they've been slowly kind of building up a pollinator garden outside along the Foss Waterway. Same with Tacoma, Salmon in the Classroom program. They've been coming in and slowly rolling out fish tanks for kids to raise salmon in all of their elementary schools. So it's a good mix, I think, in everyone. And it's always surprising how they can sometimes overlap. So all of these, which maybe I'm jumping ahead, I'll tie back to what I was going to say about grant presentations. But they do all do some presentations for this, so we get to hear about in detail all these projects every year.
So, yeah, I'll get back onto this. So one of the things that I was going to mention is each of the projects, what they're supposed to do is report back to their watershed council. So there's two different models. In the KGI area, we try to round them all up once a year and have one big party and have them all report out. And then in some of the others, they will have one or possibly two grant recipients report out on their projects at each of their monthly meetings. So that's kind of the model for how we hear back from them. And it does create some accountability because, they do have to show up in front of us and face a squad of people who are very interested in the watershed, but it's great for developing partnerships. And also, people get really excited about it. It is really one of my favorite things when we do the KGI one and we hear about everything everybody's doing. It's always sort of an uplifting opportunity. Makes you feel like things are getting better. So, anyway, we do have one centralized small grants website, which you can see here. Next. And each of these are associated. Oh, we lost the Chambers Clover one. I must have done something with it. So we do have a watershed council that's associated with each of these grant funding efforts because, like I said, they do help with the ranking piece of it. And their most important part is the reporting piece of it, where people come back and talk about their projects. So there should be a little Chambers Clover logo here and a little Nisqually logo here. I was playing with them and I think I did something wrong. Next.
Oh, there they go.
They're flying in. So some of the things to understand about how we run the program, the applications. So for us, the applications need to benefit the watershed where the project is located. So that is these are the deal breakers. It has to be geographically located in the area. Now, when we say benefit the watershed where your project is located, it doesn't necessarily mean that it has to be it doesn't necessarily, it helps if it is set in the watershed, but if there is some reason to believe that most of the people who will benefit from it are watershed residents, or there's a special focus on it, then you can make a case for that. So for example, if I wanted to do a series of workshops on how to maintain a septic system and they were all online, it would be hard to say, oh, well, that's definitely going to benefit the watershed, unless you have a component of it that says, we're going to advertise it in this area. These are a 1-year time frame. We do offer extensions, and we did that a lot during COVID because we had a lot of outreach events that we were paying for that were no longer able to do their things. So we have done extensions in the past, but really when we do a project, the intent is for it to be done within a year. We love it when people use these funds to match other funding sources. And these funds are good candidates for projects that have components that are hard to get funded from other types of funding sources. So for example, it used to be that getting funds to pay for a bus to take kids on a field trip was a hard thing to do. But in this case, we've got the flexibility. If you're able to get the money to cover the rest of it, and you just can't get the bus part of it done, this is a good example of a way in which the grants can be used. The reporting is done through presentations to the Watershed Council, and you must be in good standing from previous cycles. So if you didn't finish your project last year, we're not going to give you a new batch of money this year. And then the last one is the tax consequences. This it is not unusual for us to have an individual apply for a project, and there's nothing wrong with that. But if we're giving you $2,500 to do something, it's up to you to figure out what that's going to do to your taxes. Next. And things to consider. The other one is permits. The county does not like it if we give grants for projects that go forth and get done that should have had permits and don't get them. So we always check to see, and we have gotten back to applicants in the past and said, it looks like this project is going to need a permit. What's the plan? So that we aren't paying for projects that aren't in compliance. And the other thing is that it could impact the timeline. We are usually able to work with that. So for example, okay, you've got a good project. We really like it. We think it's going to take you a year to get all of the design stuff done and the permitting done. And that's what we'll pay for this year. And then next year you can build it. Education outreach, we fund a lot of that. We do struggle with advocacy because we do not pay for advocacy. And sometimes that can be a sort of a fuzzy line in terms of what's education and what's advocacy. You can't use the money to do fundraising or profit making. We, of course, encourage coordination and partnerships. And there are certain kinds of projects that we are not too keen on for a couple of reasons. So for example, publications and giveaways. If you're planning to propose a project where you're just going to create a bunch of brochures that maybe you're going to put out at a local park, that may have some good information in it, but when we look at it and we don't know whether or not those brochures are gonna end up in people's hands and get read, or if they're gonna end up strewn around the beach, kind of a thing. Another one that we think about with giveaways are we just adding stuff to the waste stream? So that is a consideration that we think about when we're working on some of this stuff. We're really looking for projects with and our criteria and our ranking tends to be biased towards projects that will have long-lasting environmental benefits if we can get that. It can be tricky to have a record of that for environmental project or education projects, but that is kind of what we're hoping for. Next.
Cool. I think that turns over to my part of it. So Pierce County's grant program is the one I'm most familiar with, being on the Puyallup River Watershed Council, because we work with it every day. But there are other grant programs that are somewhat similar. I do think Pierce County's is a pretty unique model in terms of its flexibility for projects. Who can apply? There's no match from the grantee on their part. It is only $2,500, so it's not a lot of money, but for a lot of these projects, $2,500 goes a long way. And I've got an example kind of at the end of how a small grant has really grown into something more. But some other similar programs and models for them, just off the top of my head, I'm sure there's more. City of Tacoma has their own kind of small grant program they call Make a Splash. That one's larger, but every grantee has to pony up 25% match. So they'll do up to $4,000. They like to focus on a broad range of things like public education outreach, as well as green stormwater infrastructure. Both Kitsap, Seattle, and King County, they all have programs focused on building green stormwater infrastructure on private properties, which is another great thing you could focus on. I think every grant program kind of has that ability to tailor it to specific things they're looking to address in their own jurisdiction, in their own area. And whether you jump into another program or you start your own, it's sort of your choice. So how do you do it, I suppose? Because it's kind of, so Pierce County's got one program I know people aren't always in Pierce County, they're not always in another jurisdiction that does have one, or maybe they're nearby. For example, there's other cities besides Lakewood in Pierce County that aren't participating. Um, so if you have an area where there is a program that you'd like to be a part of, you could work to have an interlocal agreement to join in and be a partner in that. That was originally how Lakewood and Pierce County, I think, started off with the funding, and eventually ended up where Lakewood was giving money directly to the grantees instead of to Pierce County to give to the grantees. Um, like I said, you could create your own program, you could administer your own funds. But you could also work with nonprofits, like the watershed councils in this case, to kind of serve as a fiscal agent. One of the benefits of that is there's a lot of restrictions on, a municipality writing a check, setting it out without getting any sort of deliverable. So usually they would be like a reimbursement basis on that. But one benefit of working with a fiscal agent is we can kind of front the money so the projects can get going. If me as an individual wanted to do a project to plant a stream buffer, I don't have to swipe my credit card for the $2,000 worth of plants on my own. I'll get a check and that's covered up front. Um, Additionally, fiscal agents can leverage the funds. Like Barbara Ann mentioned, Pierce County likes to see a match, and different watersheds can get funding from other places that jurisdictions might not be able to, such as private donations. We've done several kind of fundraisers for, some private donations. We even got a contract with the state that we were able to carve out a piece of to go towards a small grant program. And then our agreement with the county to administer those funds is just a professional services agreement. There's a lot of different ways you can go about starting and participating in these kind of programs. And I'd be happy to brainstorm some ideas, and I'm sure Barbara Ann has a lot of ideas too on that. Um, so if you want to do it, how would you justify it? All the cities and counties that I'm aware of that have a grant program, they show it on their MPS permits. Um, in my work at the Watershed Council, we show it on my Sumner MPS permits. Every permit's got some level of education outreach, which is a common place to show it. You're actually supporting general awareness efforts throughout based on the projects. You could be supporting stewardship components. You could even direct your funding towards specific areas, which would align with your SMAP requirements, the stormwater planning. You could even direct stuff towards TMDLs. So if you had an area with a TMDL on, say, a fecal TMDL, you could direct your small grant program to help plant buffers or do septic education, things along those lines. And I think to kind of close it out, here was one. So my time on the Watershed Council has been much shorter than others, but this is kind of one grant I've got to watch kind of from the beginning, their first presentation and grow into something more. And it started back in 2018. Two teachers, it was actually a mother-daughter team. They were both teachers. They applied for a grant on their own to do a salmon in the classroom program. They were from Blix Elementary, which is elementary, I think, in East Side Tacoma. So in the Puyallup-White Watershed, they got the $2,500, which funded all of the fish tank, the supplies, and then on their own, they took that money, set it up, created lesson plans. They engaged their fourth and fifth grade classes to raise the fish, and then partnered to release them out into a stream. They took that small grant in 2018 and shared their lesson plan to other teachers in their district. And the next year, Tacoma's like, this is a pretty good idea. Maybe we should look at doing this more places. Um, in the following year, Tacoma actually partnered with both the Pierce Conservation District and the Foss Waterway Seaport to kind of make it an official Tacoma Public Schools program with the goal of getting salmon in the classroom in all of their, I believe, elementary age schools. So today, that program, kind of from that initial, hey, we found an idea, we funded the idea, and they took it and ran with it on their own. But But that $2,500 seed money grew into 29 schools and the Tacoma School District now having salmon education as part of their normal curriculum. So it's kind of interesting. You can see $2,500 in the lot. I know at my job at City of Sumner, I couldn't do anything with $2,500, but people can. So it's worth funding. And I think that's kind of all we had. There's my contact info and Barbara Ann's contact info if you have any questions on kind of the Pierce County specific grant program or the fiscal agent side, maybe from working with a nonprofit. I think we'd be happy to answer any of those. And if I'll stop sharing
You can also
and
tell, I can also bring you lots more stories about some of the fun projects we funded in the past. And then the other thing that I was kind of hoping for is that we are continuing to look at, like I said, financial assistance programs. We've talked about it in the past. In addition to the small grants program, Pierce County does a septic repair program, and we have worked with the health department to offer financial incentives to people who need to have their systems inspected and pumped. And this whole kind of area of trying to get small amounts of money out to people to do projects is an issue that's come up several times over the years, and it's worth having a conversation about. And sometimes we've also gotten the request from the funders. So, for example, we were recently contacted by Department of Natural Resources. They were saying, hey, we've got some money, you might be able to be the pass-through on it for small restoration projects. So we are trying to figure out how to build this program, expand it maybe, and figure out what it looks like as we move forward.
I have a question. So Barbara, you talked about the kind of like the gray area between advocacy and education and outreach. I kind of wanted to hear more on that. Just like maybe what are some examples, or do you have like a story that relates to that?
Yeah, let's see, I'm trying to remember. There's kind of been a couple of folks who approached it in different ways. So there was one application that we got where the intent was to specifically target an education system towards elected officials. And we're like, that may not go over well. And then the other one, we had somebody who asked for funding to target a like a land use decision.
Mm.
There was a specific land use decision that was going to be in front of the county council, and they wanted to be able to let the community know about it, and of course fight against it. It's sort of a thing. So it is fuzzy because it can be hard to say, oh well, this is education, but a lot of times our education is intended to be, the reason we're sharing this information is so people understand the science behind the decisions that we're making, and saying, hey, this is a bad decision because of this. But it can also cross a line. So we are constantly kind of taking a look at that and figuring out how to share the science piece of it so that people understand that, and that people have good information to make decisions without going kind of getting us into the weeds. So
Kind of like like they're kind of lobbying almost, like
yeah,
kind of
yeah,
activity.
absolutely.
Yeah, that makes sense. Cool, thank you. I also just wanted to reiterate, I'm on the board of the Puyallup River Watershed Council as well. And the year before last year, I was on the ranking committee for the grant. So that was really interesting to kind of go through that process. But like Robby said, and you said, like the presentations, the report backs are absolutely my favorite part. Like it is really inspiring to hear all the little stories that all the accomplishments, and it's
Mhm.
really great. So I just wanted to reiterate that.
Yep. Right there with you. So one of the things that's going on this year is we're kind of updating the program is this came out of the Chamber's Clover Watershed Council, but we are planning to involve all of the watershed councils in it, is to have kind of a more intentional discussion about education. Because our hope is, we get a lot of educational programs that get small grants. The question is, what kinds of educational programs really are making the difference that we're wanting to make? So like I said, the Chamber's Clover Watershed Council was the one that kind of wanted to spearhead this effort, and we think it's a good one. So we're hoping to get several of our education providers together to talk about kind of what works and what doesn't, and that'll be something. And sort of, if we're going to be putting money out there, what is the most likely to have the results we're after? So that'll be a discussion we'll be having in the early parts of 2026.
Is that the same thing Emil was talking about, right? Yeah, the summit.
Actually, it's
Mhm.
probably going to happen in 2025. That's right, because he was normally the Chambers Clover folks do something called the Watershed Issues Forum, and they would pick a particular topic. One year it was lakes, one year it was groundwater, stormwater. They did land conservation one year. And this year, instead of kind of going with that approach, they wanted to mix it up a little and have a summit that talks about environmental education. So, but like I said, I expect that the summit will probably be held before the end of this year, but I'm expecting that work and those discussions to go on into 2026. And we will be trying to figure out how to take the recommendations that come out of that and integrate them into the small grants program. So, oh yeah, I will tell a story though that I really like. So we actually had a pony club come into us, and they were proposing a project where they have there's a stable where they kind of do a lot of their events around, and they invite other clubs to come visit. And what they wanted to do was to spiff up a couple of paddocks or areas where visiting horses would stay, and they wanted to improve the footing so they weren't all mucky and muddy and nasty. And we said, okay, that sounds like that could be a good project. We think it'd be really great if you also put some signage in there too, to explain why there's an environmental benefit for that. So they did their project and they did their signs, and they actually got, by the time they were done, they presented it at a couple of regional things, and they ended up getting a national award for their project. So sometimes these projects start small, but they have interest. Yeah, exactly. And then, and it really has turned into a good way for us to engage with people who we wouldn't normally necessarily stumble across. We can get them in. Another thing that we found is we oftentimes will get contacted by teachers or groups that have an idea for a project, but they haven't necessarily been connected in with some of the local resources. So sometimes it's, well, you want to do a planting project. Well, have you talked to the conservation district to find can give you a hand with figuring out what would be a good thing to plant in this area? And helping people find the resources that they've got just to improve their program and kind of bring them into the fold a little bit.
Well, I think that might be all that we've got, Stephanie.